Okay, oh, I didn't realize I had the light on. Alright, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for TwinCitiesGeek.com, movieswithmark.com, and filminquiry.com. And it's the middle of December, and I've got plenty of films to cover here. We're right in the middle of the busiest part of award season. I've been watching multiple movies a day. So I got to get around to covering a few of them. So we're going to cover a few of a few upcoming films, as well as a few smaller films that we need to catch up on. So obviously the big one coming out this Christmas we're going to be covering is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. We're going to be covering Queer, a new film from Luca Guadagnino based on the William S. Burroughs novel. And we'll also be covering September 5th based on the 1972 Olympic terrorist attack seen from the point of view of a news crew. In addition to that, there's a few other films that I want to cover here, including Night Bitch, which should be opening in the middle of December here. And then I also wanted to cover the latest film from Paul Schrader called Oh Canada. And I also wanted to cover a surprising film from Joshua Oppenheimer, who you might know from the Indonesian genocide documentaries. He made a musical starring some pretty big names like Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon. Of all things. So we'll cover his film called The End on here as well. Maybe we'll save that for the end as well. So a lot of I think pretty much most of these are going to be early reviews. Most of these are kind of going to be in like limited release if you can find them. But like they're definitely not going to be expanding until much later this year. So if you want to stay informed on the latest films, especially like I think the most obvious one that a lot of people are looking forward to is Nosferatu, since that's coming out on Christmas. So this is an early review here. So you want to see more early reviews like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video so that more people can stay informed on the latest films. Okay. So without further ado, let's get to, of course, we'll head straight for the top one. Right for the top. Because I know everyone's been looking forward to Robert Eggers' new vampire film, me included. So, let me get my notes up here. Oh, and also, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the comment scorn of Season's Bleedings. Well, 'tis the time for horror films. Well, that's pretty good. We're getting a horror film on Christmas, and a damn good one, if that's any spoilers. Currently watching the infamous Silent Night, Deadly Night. Oh boy. Well, make sure you follow it up with the second film as a nice chaser to that. Just because, like, the first film, if you've ever watched, like, the first Silent Night, Deadly Night, because I know everyone knows the second film with, like, the garbage day scene and all that. But if you watch the first film, it's surprisingly, like, brutal and, like, gritty and dark. And I know, like, if you watch the second film, you've gotten bits and pieces of it since they recap it so much. But, yeah, it's a hell of a ride, that series. It's been a while since I've seen the other films, but I'm pretty sure the fifth film involved, like, murderous toys, I think, and if I'm remembering it correctly. It's been a while. Also, because there's 5 Silent Night, Deadly Night films, which is probably blowing people's minds. Okay, so I got my notes up here, which I'm going to start between there. All right. So here we go with Nosferatu in 3, 2, 1. So David Eggers' Nosferatu is very much the type of not David. I messed that up. Take 2 here. Why did I say David Eggers? I'm pretty sure that. All right. Regardless, once more from the top. 3, 2, 1. So Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is very much what you'd expect from Robert Eggers for making a vampire film. So Eggers' filmography has been mostly about like historical horror films and really ingraining you in that era, you know, with like films like The Witch and The Northman and The Lighthouse, just like, you know, fully immersing yourself in this historical horror. So there's a lot of, you know, based on like his past films, which are phenomenal as far as I was concerned. I know some people were a little bit iffy on Nosferatu, but I still thought it was, you know, pretty high up there for, you know, for this director. So Nosferatu, big bar is set for this director to see how he can handle this adaptation of the classic German expressionist film. And he very much delivers. I'm sure it's no surprise here. Eggers once again proves that he knows how to direct horror here, and I think what makes his version of Nosferatu so compelling is that he finds the best way to make it feel like a nightmare at all times. There's a lot of his hallmarks here, like the way that he like transitions between scenes, the way that he focuses on people getting lost within their own heads, and just the psychological horror of it all. Like, so yeah, all the Eggers hallmarks, but I think just like the way that it proceeds here, like it feels like every scene is meant to evoke some level of dread and terror within the audience. It's very much how like a lot of people will tell you to write a horror screenplay, which is that at the end of like every like page or so, there should be something scary happening at all times to keep the audience interested and invested. And here it's like that throughout. And I think that it doesn't let up because the story is so it's so immersive with the way that Eggers shoots it that you just love to get lost within it all. So like the story is Thomas Hutter, played by Nicholas Hoult, is going to visit Count Orlok, played by Bill Skarsgård, and it's pretty much like the same Dracula story. Like Orlok takes an interest in real estate, and then he moves to this new town, and then he starts attacking the populace and forming an interest here in Hutter's wife Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp. And I have to give like a special commendation here, just because like Lily Rose Depp is surprisingly good here in the role of Ellen, just because like the film starts with her and it kind of ends with her mostly taking control of this story where she's like seduced by Dracula. In this case, Count Orlok, and the one to defeat the vampire in the end. And I think like she goes through the best arc just because like it feels like she's present throughout this narrative, and she goes through being initially compelled by Orlok in the very beginning of the film, like immediately from the first shot. Like they show before Thomas even meets Orlok has already seduced this woman, and there's like this grand like evil seduction going on immediately. So she's got a lot to fight against, and the way that she kind of like loses her mind and tries to maintain her sanity while everything is crumbling around her is just fantastic. And I say that because Depp is working with like some top talents here, like not just like Nicholas Hoult, who's fantastic, portraying like the fearfulness of Thomas Hutter, or Bill Skarsgård, who is very much playing up his role of Orlok. Like he's very much leaning into the operatics that Eggers has written into this film, but also a lot of other big names here, like Willem Dafoe as Professor Alban Eberhard von Franz. And he delivers very much what you'd expect. He's stressing, the importance of, recognizing that there are demons in this world and how to defeat them. So he speaks with a lot of passion, but also urgency, so that there's enough strength within his character where, even people who doubt him would start believing him, just with the way that he is looking straight into the abyss here and telling everybody, you have to take Orlok seriously. He is going to mess up your town. He's going to take your women. You have to take this seriously. And he does a great job playing off of Dr. Seaver, played by Ralph Ineson. And they have a pretty good dynamic, especially since they share most of the screen time together, and we only briefly get to see him more around on Thomas and Ellen, and it's mostly just them fighting for trying to them having this fight over science and belief, and they have to learn to work together ultimately. And it's interesting to see that dynamic play up with the way that with every scene, Defoe more and more convinces people that no, Orlok is a vampire, and this is how we've got to stop him. Now, Eggers' direction here makes everything seem like a trippy nightmare, and that goes for every scene. One scene where I thought the film might get bogged down in the mechanics is the scene where Thomas Hutter is first going to visit Orlok. Now, there's a bit of Thomas does have a bit of a nightmare in the village that he stops in before he goes to the castle, which is surreal enough, and I kind of expected that from Eggers. But the way that he approaches the castle, like the way that he's picked up by the carriage and arrives at the gates, it just like it seamlessly transitions, where it feels like, you know, one moment he's in the woods and then the next moment he's like right at the gate, with just like, you know, just like the passing of shadows. And the way that it feels like he's going deeper and deeper into the castle with just these dark shadows and like the harsh coloring of like the contrasting blue and everything like that. It feels like, yeah, like you're going into some place very, very terrifying and not just like an old dusty castle. It does feel like you're going into the gates of hell. And what really helps evoke more of that atmosphere, I think, is like Eggers' smart choice to not reveal much of Orlok. Like, he only reveals a little bit of him as the film goes on. Like, you hear his voice, you see his shadow, and you see like his long fingernails in the beginning. And then as film goes on, you progressively see more and more of him, including like even in a scene where Thomas like approaches Orlok, when he like rises out of his grave completely naked, he's still in the shadows, and you don't see all of them. And then eventually, I can understand why they do this, because like when you eventually do see him in his full form, and I do mean you do see like, you know, Skarsgård's face and all that in his full vampire getup. It's not as impressive. Like it's not as much of a disappointment as something like Longlegs, where, you know, the marketing kept hiding Nicolas Cage, and then when you finally see him, it just looks like Nicolas Cage just like fell in a vat of flour. It's not as bad, but it's not that impressive, where you can understand why Eggers was leaning more on the lighting and kind of like the slow reveal. And I think that works, because by the time like you do get like the full form of seeing like all the makeup on Skarsgård's Orlok, it arrives at a scene where Skarsgård is already like delivering this powerful monologue about threatening Ellen, saying like, look, I'm starting the clock here, and, you know, I'm gonna come for your soul eventually. And the lines that he's given here, if they're not delivered with like just the right amount of like belief and sinisterness in that delivery, it could easily be comical. And especially for like the makeup that they use with Skarsgård, that scene could fall apart immediately. In fact, if you look closely, when you get to that part of the film, you look very closely at it, you could kind of see where this would go awry. But because of the way that Eggers shoots it and the way that Skarsgård just nails that performance, and he leans into the theatrics of it, like pretty much all the actors do here. Like worth noting here is like Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin as another couple who get attacked by Orlok. They're pretty damn good, and I think like they sell it. They recognize that these lines are kind of like, they're very, you know, you have to project them. You have to speak them as though you believe in them, and that they pack the emotion. Because if you don't, this could feel like a very stuffy historical horror film. And it very much doesn't, mainly because it does what Eggers does best with his horror films, which is lean into what's more interesting. So, you know, it's, yeah, like, you know, Orlok, attacking people and like sending like a plague of rats across the city, and all those transformations and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. But I love the way that Eggers leans more into the psychosexual angle of it, which has been present in pretty much all his films, and I expected it here. But I love the way that he just like lingers on these moments and kind of embraces a lot more of the sexuality that would come with like a vampire story. It's probably, even for as grotesque as it gets at the time, this is probably one of the hornier vampire films since the one from the 90s with the Bram Stoker's Dracula. Not just because there's quite a bit of sex in it. In fact, there's like some very aggressive sex and sacrificial sex in this film that directly plays into the narrative. Like you know, like you'll hear some people say like, oh, there's unnecessary sex scenes in here. the sex scenes are very much they're very necessary for this type of story. It does really showcase the dynamic between Thomas, Ellen, and Orlok, especially when like Thomas tries to save Ellen from Orlok's influence when, you know, she starts becoming more possessed, her body starts contorting, and then when you get to like the end of the picture, it's kind of like Ellen taking ownership of like basically of her own body and kind of like uses that to defeat Orlok in a rather like weirdly grotesque way. Like it felt more like, it felt a little bit like it was coming out more of like a Cronenberg film at times, with like the way they were shooting like that final scene. But yeah, there's a lot to love about this film. I could gush about like all the stuff that Robert Eggers does best, but if you're familiar with his work, you can probably guess what he would do with this type of vampire film, but also the fact that he has the guts to lean into it. And just like the way that he shoots the film with like the harsh blues and the shadows and like the ease of the transitioning and the spooky atmosphere, and just not shying away from like the existential dread or the psychosexual angles, just evoking all those elements of classic vampire stories and just amping them up with like the more like a grander psychological level to explore. It's what Eggers does best, and that's why I really, really, really love the hell out of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I had a feeling I would, but it still surprised me in the end. So Nosferatu will be playing in theaters everywhere this Christmas. And you definitely don't want to miss it. It's my favorite horror film of the year. All right. Let me get a little bit of water and we'll keep barreling through. We got a lot to cover today, so we'll just keep that momentum going. See if I can speed run all these reviews. Not that I'm trying to like make them a certain length or anything. Like I'm just I want to cover everything before my voice lets out. Okay. So here we go with Queer in 3, 2, 1. So Luca Guadagnino's Queer is based on the William S. Burroughs novel of a writer in the 1950s in Mexico, seeking just gay sex and booze and drugs and trying to find something worth living for. Now, I know that, the other Guadagnino film we got this year was Challengers, which was, it was dynamic, it was full of energy, it was highly erotic, and it engaged you from beginning to end. So, Queer is very much a change of pace. It's much more slow, it's much more thoughtful, a bit more cerebral, and I think it's like, it's a pretty good, like, chaser. Like, it still has a lot of what you'd expect from Guadagnino with his directing style. It also has a soundtrack by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, but while Atticus and Ross's score in Challengers was very aggressive, and it felt like it was like another character in the room amid this love triangle. Queer is a lot more. It's a lot more gentler. It was surprising to hear Reznor and Ross kind of like the way that they placed music on the story, which did feel fitting, but it was surprising like how perfectly it matched the tone. So the whole story is that Daniel Craig plays Lee, who is like an aged writer who's just desperate to seek anything to feel alive. Like, he spends his nights in Mexico, cruising the bars, looking for any men that are interested, that would share his glances, and he just kind of, he's a little bit shy. Like, he like sits around the bar, like ordering drinks, like looking around, seeing, if any dudes are interested, and then he thinks someone might be interested, but then when he realizes, oh, maybe not, he just finishes his drink, leaves, goes to another bar, and repeats the process further and further until eventually he finds someone to go to bed with. Unfortunately, he's very desperate. Like he really wants to just find someone to love, anybody in this scene. That he'll go with anybody who's willing. To the point where he's willing to just like give. Like when we get to like the first sex scene when he actually does bring someone to bed, he takes charge. He takes full charge. Like he's doing everything just because he wants. He wants that moment to last. He's hoping that he can just find something to make him feel good again, and isn't sure that that love would be in the equation, and just embraces sex, which is kind of his whole deal with just like embracing the vice of this scenario. Like if he can't find someone to go to bed with that night, he'll either just keep drinking, or he'll resort to heroin. And as the film goes on, we kind of learn why he's doing all this, because he's trying to like fight off the demons of his past that, you know, did involve drugs, and it's still haunting him to this day. So he needs something, anything, to just, you know, just find something worth living for the next day. And I mean, he does have friends. Like he does have another gay friend, Joe, played by a pretty hefty Jason Schwartzman. And Joe is kind of like... He's kind of like more of like the runt like of his gay scene, because like Joe will constantly talk about how he does take some men to bed, but then they'll also end up like stealing from him, and he doesn't have much luck on that front. He just keeps talking about everything that gets stolen from him. So like Lee does have some friendship during the day, but when night falls, you know, he's desperate for any form of passion that he can find. And thankfully, he does find someone who might be more of a romantic companion in the form of Eugene Allerton, played by Drew Starkey. And he is a U.S. serviceman who is also kind of like looking for, looking for some fun, but in like much more of like a quiet nature. Like Lee will often like get into conversations very quickly and be a little bit like desperate to like to maintain focus, whereas Eugene is a lot more calm. He's more serene. In fact, when they first meet in the streets, amid a cockfight of everything, where they share glances, and I love the fact that for that scene, Guadagnino chose like this very like modern music to place on top of it. Which I think is kind of interesting how Guadagnino plays with time here, trying to evoke the right sensation more than like I think historical accuracy, because he does get a bit fantastical here. He does like things do get very psychological and surreal as the film goes on. And the relationship that develops between Lee and Eugene is rather unique. Like I love the scene where Lee first invites Eugene back to his place, and they share a drink, and the drinks go a little bit awry because like eventually Eugene ends up puking, but that doesn't end up stopping the night from ending in sex, where of course like Lee wants to initiate, but then the thing that he doesn't expect is that Eugene reciprocates. And it's a very, very erotic and a very, very touching, and little tinges of sadness are in that scene. And the perfect companion for that is very much Reznor and Ross's soundtrack. Because if you listen closely to that track from the film, it starts off very quiet, very serene, almost a little bit like whimsical, that you might hear on like a little bit of like a light romantic comedy. And it's very sweet, it's very somber, and it kind of like progresses. And then when it starts getting more into like the sex scenes, the music becomes a little bit louder and a little bit more aggressive, where some electronic does come in there, and it feels like it's just like echoes of electronics, just to more or less like symbolize like the orgasms that they're having. And just like the way that it perfectly encapsulates that moment that's supposed to be sweet, but also, intense, and bringing out like that passion there. It's, for as much as I want to say that this isn't as much like Challengers, Reznor and Ross's soundtrack does feel like another person in the room with them. Just because like it perfectly matches the tone that is going for here. And even though this is a film that it's very linear, unlike Challengers, like it's diced up into chapters here, and there is an adventure to it where Lee and Eugene go on a trip through the forest to to basically find like this drug which Lee believes will grant him like telepathy, where he'll be able to connect with people on a much grander level, which would seem like like the ultimate prize for Lee. And of course, we can kind of like deduce that this film is a bit fantastical, but it won't resolve itself so easily. So you expect there to be some tragedy when it gets to that moment, but it's a tragedy that's like it's like don't get me wrong, it's melancholic, but I think it's also a bit transient in the way that kind of like Lee learns to try to realize that he might not have Lee to always be there for him, especially since Lee might realize that Eugene is not always going to be there for him, because Eugene starts realizing that Lee is a handful. Like he's desperate. Like the nights where Eugene doesn't spend them with Lee, like Lee will get like desperate. He'll resort to drugs and drinking again, and sometimes he'll just stumble over to Eugene's place, like trying to get more of his attention, because he can't bear to be alone with his thoughts and his nightmares and his echoes of the past. And even when they go on this trip to South America to find this drug, Lee's drug use just gets worse, and Eugene he kind of silently accepts it, but there's also this realization that Eugene is probably not going to hang around Lee that long. And when they get to that moment where Lee and Eugene like take this drug that's supposed to like supposedly give them telepathy, and they start connecting on a level that's that feels beyond like mind and body. Like you see like their vision of basically them like putting their hands through each other's naked bodies and like feeling something more. Lee just realizes that it might not be enough, or that Eugene's not going to reciprocate, and it's a very like tragic moment, but also like a very sobering moment of like realization, especially when the film with its epilogue, it just goes straight up surreal in how it tries to find any lingering notion of what we seek out of life when when our time is up, when time passes for so long, and we feel like we haven't quite found like that golden treasure that you think is going to make life grand, or grant you immortality, or make you feel so much better about yourself, and just forget the past. Like it's never quite there. And I think just kind of recognizing the sweeter and the quieter moments that Lee kind of more or less realizes by the end is just surprisingly sad and sweet at the same time, and perfectly communicated through the soundtrack. So yeah, there are a lot of like erotic moments between Lee and Eugene, but also like very, very touching moments, especially moments where Eugene is like comforting Lee when he's at his worst. Like at one point, Lee is just suffering, from like the shakes of like, of him taking so many drugs, and Lee is still there to like comfort him in bed. And it's those moments that kind of stick with Lee as the film goes on. So I love the way that the film is written, the way that it takes its time, the way that it's that it goes into surreal and nightmarish territory and never just stops to explain everything. Like there's never a moment where it's highly expositional, where Lee just sits down and explains his past. Like we only get bits and pieces of it through trippy visions that come as the film kind of goes along. And Daniel Craig's performance in this role, I honestly think this is the best of his career. I think just because this is such a nuanced performance where, like, Craig has to play this guy who feels like he's in control when, like, he's around Eugene, and is desperate when he's not, and just terrified of his dreams when he visits them. And this is a role that requires a lot, and I think that Craig just nails it. And like Drew Starkey, I think, more or less just is kind of just like there embracing the ride, and I think has this quiet dignity to him, which is perfect to play off of with Daniel Craig here. Like they do an amazing job when they're both on screen. And yeah, I haven't read the William S. Burroughs novel, but I did hear that it was shelved for a few decades before it was eventually published. And that even when it was published, Burroughs didn't really consider himself that much ingrained within like the queer movement and the queer scene. And I think I almost kind of think that, like, and maybe this might change when I read the book, but I think that Guadagnino might have been trying to figure out why someone might feel that distant, and unwilling to like embrace that part of themselves. And I wonder if that played a role in like deciding the direction of this film, because from what I've heard Guadagnino describe this film as, is that when he read the book, he considered it unfinished. He felt like, there's not enough explored here, like there should be something more. And I feel like there is like this daringness to explore odder territories with this type of material, because it's not just like, I would for lack of a better term, I do think it's a little bit more like a David Lynch puzzle box as it goes along, just because like it becomes much more surreal, especially by the epilogue. Like the epilogue just bombards you with cryptic imagery, and just is kind of like begging your attention to try to like figure out what Lee ultimately takes away from his time in Mexico and his time with Eugene, and just being involved in the Mexico nightlife. But for establishing that atmosphere, it's beautifully like serene and sad. And the fact that Guadagnino takes his time, like I said, if Challengers was like the shot, Queer is kind of like the less aggressive chaser. Like it's still got some tinges of a lot. I will consider that. I'll put it on the wish list. Thank you for the super chat there. I will keep an eye on that. It's the first time I ever got one of those. All right. So, I should close out this review here. So, Queer, it's very... This film is very slow. Like, and in fact, it's very, like it's diced up into chapters, but it is very meandering at times, despite its very linear storytelling here. That I get the film runs 2.5 hours. So like, if you're not willing to be engaged, with a bit of like a slow burn romance, it's not too slow, but it does meander into different territories here to kind of establish Lee and his environment. If you're willing to stick with it if you're willing to stick with the film, it works surprisingly well. Like, I just found myself just gazing up at the screen, just trying to figure it out, just being amazed by this odyssey that Lee goes on. And just Daniel Craig's performance in this just works so damn well. It's one of the best of his career. So I loved the hell out of Queer. It's a damn good Luca Guadagnino film and an even better Daniel Craig film. So Queer is playing in theaters this weekend. Jenny Chan. Actually, I think I do remember seeing a trailer for that when I opened Netflix one time. It looked pretty good. I mean, Netflix has like a lot of cartoons that usually look pretty good, but I do remember that looking pretty good. I'll have to check it out. But I will put it on the watch list. Thank you, Corinth, for the $5. I might review it on stream. I usually review movies. Sometimes I do television, but I'll check it out. All right. What was the other one I was going to review here? Oh wow! I just realized I did not make a title card for this for September 5th. Let me get that up there quick. So if you're just joining us, we just reviewed Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers, starring Thomas Holt. Not Thomas Holt. It's Nicholas Holt. Nicholas Holt plays Thomas Hutter. And it's a damn good film coming out this Christmas. And Queer is another damn good film from Luca Guadagnino. It's not like Challengers is probably my favorite Guadagnino film of the year more than Queer, but I think that's only because Challengers surprised us a lot more, I think, than Queer does. September 5th, about 5 minutes. That's the obvious joke. I mean, technically, I watched this in November, so it's a film about September. I watched it in November, and we're reviewing it in December. And I realize now when I say that it's the same joke I repeated when I reviewed Tuesday. Saw it on a Monday, wrote the review on the Tuesday, reviewed it on Wednesday. That's what happens when you get these titles, you know. All right. So let's get to September 5th. Not much of a change here. Another grim and somber film we're reviewing here. It's not a theme. Don't worry. We've got... Actually, we don't. We mostly got sad movies. Maybe I'll briefly mention some happy movies when we get to the end here. All right. But here's the review of September 5th. All right. So here we go with September 5th in 3, 2, 1. So September 5th is based on the true story of the 1972 Olympics terrorist situation in which athletes were taken hostage and the news tried to cover it. Now, this film, you know, this event has been talked about a lot and it's been in films, but this movie is entirely from the perspective of the ABC News crew who were broadcasting the Olympics live. And they were just, the team they had there, they were just there for sports, but once this terrorist story broke out, they scrambled to try to, to try to act like, you know, they were covering this terrorist event instead of covering the sports. And the thing is, I'm a sucker for these types of films about journalism where they really get into the nuts and bolts of how they cover stories, and this film does that in spades. They have everything that you would want from like a television broadcast journalism perspective from like the 1970s. You hear them talking about the satellite link and how, you know, they can't broadcast everything because they would lose the satellite from time to time. They talk about shooting stuff on video, getting people in the studio, getting the phone hooked up to to like the broadcast, which required a little bit more technique at the time. They talk about getting like one of the cameras that we're going to have in the newsroom, trying to wheel that out of the studio so that they could get a shot of the hotel where the hostages are being kept, and just developing film as quickly as possible, getting phone calls over the wire on the accurate news to report, and just getting the ABC identity, like, you know, the little watermark over like the broadcast. Just all of the mechanics there are present, and I love the film mostly on that basis. But there's a lot to love about the dynamic and the technique here, mostly because you got some pretty good performances here. You got Peter Skarsgård playing Rooney Aldridge, who's basically just passing off late night duties over to Joffrey Mason, who's like kind of on the B team. Joffrey is played by John Magaro. And he has to make the tough call about what to do when they hear about the hostages being taken during this event. Because like he initially like just it feels like it's going to be like a quiet morning. He gets in there and then he starts hearing gunshots, and then like they get news, and he's like, well, what do we do? Do we cover it, or do we cover sports? Because like what they're doing is basically going against more or less what ABC brought them there to do, which was just to cover sports. So trying to cover this event was going to require like a lot of ingenuity and a lot of creativity to try to get this broadcasted, especially since like, you know, this was like a television first. This was like, you know, a live broadcast of a hostage situation, which had never been done before. So this was like untested territory here that was going to be watched by millions of people around the world. And the fact that they were able to pull it off is pretty brilliant. But I love how the film always keeps in perspective that this is a tragedy, and that even though, like, you know, they're making television history here, there are still like concerns about like the lives of the hostages and debating the merits of what goes on with the television broadcast. Because at one point, they bring up how, you know, they're live. They have a camera shooting footage of like the hotel window where the hostages are being kept, and they question at one point like, wait, should we be should we be broadcasting this? Won't the terrorists see it? Won't they know about what's going on out there with everything we're filming? And they were like, no. Like, we're broadcasting to ABC. This is going to go to the U.S. Nobody in Germany is going to see it. But wait a minute. This is a hotel for the Olympic athletes, and the hotels there, they do have a link to the ABC broadcast. So they would be seeing this. So they kind of like scramble to turn it off, but also debate if what they're doing is just. And this gets challenged by everyone. It gets challenged by ABC. It gets challenged by the German authorities. So they are kind of fighting this uphill battle to try to broadcast this crucial event while still questioning what is the right call. Because there are several moments where Mason is debating what to do, and sometimes he does turn to Rooney, and Rooney is just kind of like, well, it's up to you, or it's in your hands. You know, what's the call? Do we broadcast this? Do we interview this person who's tied to this event? Do we break the news that like the hostages lived or not? Because at one point there's that crucial moment where they're uncertain about what happened when the terrorists and the hostages were brought to a plane, and if if they made it out alive. Because initially there were reports that all the hostages lived, and then it was later revealed within like a few minutes or so that no, the hostages didn't all live, and like the terrorists had wiped them all out and nobody lived. And it's one of those things where you kind of like kick yourself over if you don't report on it accurately when time is a factor, but also like accuracy matters most. Because when it's reported that, the hostages didn't leave, that they didn't make it out alive, it stings. It stings for everyone in the newsroom because they feel the weight of the tensions happening here. When this was like a highly political maneuver that was just making tensions rise in Germany, and I think the film doesn't turn away from these politics. It does address them, but it does try to keep in focus that the broadcast matters most, more than not so much more than politics, but in the moment. And this, I think, is perfectly personified through a German translator working for ABC. Called Marianne Gebhardt, and she's played by Leonie Benich, and she's basically translating all the German that she's getting coming out of the news and from the authorities, and trying to help out everyone there while also recognizing the tensions that were going on there and how bad it looks for Germany to be holding these Olympics, and there's a terrorist attack going on there with especially with like the anti-Semitism that is going on with the hostages that were taken here. And it is an aspect that is addressed, and people do get heated and emotional within the newsroom, but they try to like keep it in check. It's one of those aspects where it does feel believable for a newsroom where people would be furious and like tensions would rise and they would like jump to assumptions and start attacking each other, and like it comes up, but like it's thankfully it's pushed down a bit. And especially with Mary Ann being like a German translator who recognizes why like the German authorities are being very cautious with this material, and also recognizing that anti-Semitism is not Germany, and that's not me, as with like every other like representation that goes on within covering this highly volatile event. So the film, directed by Tim Fehlbaum, does a great job just focusing on the nuts and bolts and like making it does dramatize parts here and there. Like you do get that moment where someone is just running down the hallways and they're racing around the clock, and there's lots of like close-ups to get this footage on the air, get it developed really quickly, but it doesn't feel like they're trying too hard to dramatize it. You're always like locked in with the event and covering it, and you're seeing what all the reporters are seeing, and you're seeing all the calls that they're making behind the scenes, listening to like the director's track and what's going on in the control room and what's going on out just outside the studio, and just balancing all the duties of everybody here and just trying to figure out what's going on in the situation, which for an age without the internet, you had to scramble. You had to call everyone. You had to look at the news. You had to, get in witnesses if you could. You had to like really scramble if you wanted to cover a news story like this that very much made history. And it does very much balance that celebratory angle of covering such an event with the darkness that comes along with such a tragedy here. And I know that, like, for some people, they will be frustrated with the fact that the film doesn't, like, take a little bit more of a like a more like politically charged stance, just because it feels like it easily could have. Like, and I don't quite want to say that it's more like objective, because like I said, it does address the politics and the anti-Semitism and a little bit of like the nationalism that comes with such a tragedy. But the way that I think it balances it out while still trying to be kind of like a true story newsroom drama, I think works so well. So if you like your if you like movies about broadcast journalism that are tight and gripping, and just there are some fantastic performances here. This will very much be your jam. And since I really do love those types of films, you know, especially with movies like Network and broadcast news, September 5th was very much my jam. It's a very tight and engrossing thriller about a real event and how it was broadcasted across the world. So September 5th will have a limited opening this weekend, I believe, and it will be expanding into theaters more into January. So keep an eye out for it, because it's a damn good film. All right, what do you go at next year? Okay, all right. Actually, we do kind of have a little bit of a lighter film here. The Night Bitch. All right. Here we go. Let me get my notes up here. All right. A little bit more water, though. Haven't lost my voice yet. So let's keep it going. All right, here we go with Night Bitch in 3, 2, 1. So, Night Bitch is a film all about a stressed mother turning into a werewolf. Well, more or less. That's basically like the way the film's been marketed, and it more or less is that, but I'm going to say this right from the start. If you're thinking this is going to become like a straight up like creature feature, you might be disappointed, because I think this film it kind of wants to go the route of like the Babadook, where it balances like this bizarre type of horror with a relatable tragedy and stress that comes with parenthood, and it tries to balance them both. But I don't quite think that the film quite knows how to like merge them as much as like the Babadook did, that it just kind of seems like it favors like, okay, here's the creature sequences and here's the part about the character trying to learn to like embrace motherhood and like address the issues that she has with it, because at the center of the story is Amy Adams, playing a mother looking after her young son, and her husband, played by Scoot McNairy, is constantly at work and isn't that helpful around the house. So Adam's character is feeling very much stressed by this, and she just gets ingrained within like the routine that just kind of wears on her. Her mornings, she's making breakfast for her child, and then during the day she takes him to library readings with all the other moms that she can't stand, with kids that she can't stand. And then she gets home and she has to, get everything ready for bed and cook dinner, and bedtime doesn't come easy because the kid won't go to sleep, and she's just stressed. And the film does a good job kind of like embracing like the stress that Adams feels here, because like she tries to find avenues to bring out more of her artistic side that she pushed aside so that she could raise her child. And I did like her performance to that degree. But of course, as the film goes on, she gets a book from the library, looking up like weird things that happen to women, like women transforming into werewolves, because that very much seems to be happening to her. She starts noticing that she has more hair on her body. She she's craving meat more. She can smell better. And then, of course, if you're seeking more of like the actual creature feature angle, yes, she does discover a tail growing on her back in a very disgusting kind of body horror way. And I want to temper this by saying this is not going to lean like too far into body horror here. Like if you were expecting a moment from like, you know, American Werewolf in Paris where she has like a very grotesque transformation, it's not quite here. Like they more or less just cut to her being like a dog. Because yeah, like during the night, you know, she transforms into a dog and she does all the things that dogs do. She hunts squirrels, she runs with the other dogs, and then of course, you know, she wakes up in the morning, she's a human again, and she goes out on her porch and here's all these dead animals that she that she assaulted last night. And as the film goes along, like she learns to kind of embrace that dog side of herself, and it helps her better connect with her child. But it also kind of furthers some of the tensions here with her husband. And eventually it gets to a point where Addams has to realize that she can't be dependent on this dog form of herself for everything. Because while it does help with her son, it does get in the way of her trying to connect more with her husband, even though it does seem to like improve their sex life. But it doesn't improve when she visits with some old college friends, when she starts getting more of a life together. She still feels distant. She still feels angry. And like the dog-like rage still like courses through her, that she has to make a choice. She has to either become more of a dog, or she has to kind of find a means to better herself. And ultimately what the film resolves on that with is basically her realizing that she has to divorce her husband. That it's not working out, like he's not being present and she can't communicate with him, and that she doesn't really love him, and that she has to realize that divorce has to happen. And the film more or less kind of has like a happy ending to that degree. And I was very much mixed on how the film would end that way, because on one level, this is very much like the ending that you'd feel like Addams deserves. Like, you know, she's not like the worst mother. Like she never hits her kid. She never grows too violent. Like she does have like dark thoughts, but they're not as like dark as you would assume. Like she's fantasizing about killing her child. It never gets to that point, but I think that's only because her character recognizes that she doesn't want to get to that point, and she makes a conscious effort to better herself. So it is satisfying to see her, you know, go from, you know, favoring this lifestyle of becoming a dog to you know, just being like a better mother. But on another level, you almost kind of want to see something more explored through it, because it feels like by the third act it's just trying to find like the simpler resolves for it. It's like, okay, all this stuff is going wrong in her life. How can you solve it without just resorting to the dog transformation? And it's you know, it's all the stuff you'd expect. You know, she's more emotionally honest with her husband. She finds a better balance of like, you know, what works with her son. She starts connecting with more of the mothers. She explores more of her career and just starts, you know, painting again and just finding herself. And it's the happy ending that you want for that type of character, but you also kind of crave a little bit more of the horror angle from it. So it's kind of like this weird, almost kind of like Goldilocks zone between like a full-blown, you know, like Babadook type film, or just like a dopey Shaggy Dog type of film, especially for like the dog scenes where it's just like another dog, and Amy Adams is doing voiceover for like a, you know, basically more or less like the Shaggy Dog. So yeah, I was very torn on this film because there's a lot of relatable elements, and Adams is very good in this film. And Scoot McNairy, I thought was really good in how he also kind of recognizes, you know, like the emotional distancing as well, where, because like up to the second act, you just see him as just this kind of like cartoonish husband who doesn't really feel anything. And then by the third act, you realize, no, he actually does feel a lot, and that if there were problems, that, you know, he and she both had to be more open about, you know, the things that concern them in this relationship. So there's some good performances, but the the balance between like the creature feature and the thematic elements isn't quite there. It always feels like here's a scene where Adams transforms into the dog, and here's the scene where she starts connecting with the mothers, and it doesn't really feel like there's much of a cohesion there. I could see where the film was going with this. I could see how it was trying to find a connection between like the primal and the desires that come with motherhood. And for the first act, it does a great job kind of exploring that and kind of like carefully weaving them together here. But by the time you get to the second act, you can kind of see it start to like splinter off, where it feels like the stories are not going to connect here, and ultimately Adams is just going to abandon this dog aspect of herself, which again, it's happy, but you kind of wish for something more there. So yeah, Night Bitch, it's not quite a creature feature, and it's not quite the Babadook, and it's just kind of an okay type of psychological horror film that kind of feels like it's not getting the most out of this material, which I think there is something worth exploring here. But Night Bitch just seems to be content with Amy Adams transforming into a dog for a bit and doing some dog things, and then eventually becoming a good mother again. And on that level, I'm very mixed about the film, and like it has some fine performances, some good scenes here and there, but ultimately it's not as great of a film as it could have been. So Night Bitch should be playing in a few limited theaters right now, and I think it's going to be expanding next week. I do think it's expanding on November 20th, so you can catch that as well. All right, I got two more to go here. And these are two films from directors I actually love. So, you know what? It's a little bit of a preemptive here. You know, I'll cover the film I don't have as much to say on first. So we'll cover Joshua Oppenheimer's The End. All right. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. So The End is a film by Joshua Oppenheimer, whose previous films, The Act of Killing and the follow-up film, The Look of Silence, were some of the best documentaries of the 2010s for focusing on the Indonesian genocide. And I love the way that Oppenheimer just focuses on the inhumanity that still resides from the past and just bring it out into the present. So he just did a fantastic job with those films. So it did surprise me when his next film that we just got recently, called The End, is a musical that takes place after the apocalypse. And it's entirely from the point of view of a rich family who now live underground in a very, very spacious and lush bunker, and try to like maintain some order and just kind of like try to keep the past at bay. So among the people living in this bunker is a mother played by Tilda Swinton and a father played by Michael Shannon. Their son is played by George McKay. And their son has grown up mostly within this bunker and not knowing much of the outside world, so he's kind of adopted the view that his mother and father have been teaching him. Although his father is more open to teaching him about the world than his mother is, because his mother is just kind of like, tries not to talk too much about her past and what happened before the fall. So Michael Shannon basically teaches his son, all about history, but leaves out a few parts here and there, like a lot of like the darker parts. So it's very much like, the type of like homeschooling where they teach you about history, but not the grotesqueness of like the Chinese railroad and slavery, or the oil industry, and just kind of like glossing over it. But then all that is kind of like thrown off with the arrival of a girl from the surface, played by Moses Ingram, who, she does what you would expect when she arrives. She challenges this notion that her son, that this kid played by played by McKay, has learned the wrong things and that he needs to get a little bit more of an education. Now, based on the way that I described the premise of the film up to that point, you might be thinking, okay, this is a film where kind of the son realizes more about the world and rebels against his parents and just is so bitter that he feels like he can't live with them and might go to live on the surface world. And if you were thinking that, you are wrong. You and if you were thinking it was going to be like a very dark film, you're kind of wrong on that too, because this is kind of like an odd film in how it kind of like embraces these kind of like operatic type of musical numbers. Like they feel like they have a full orchestra and they have these very like somber but also very almost kind of like very tender lyrics that are going on here, because the characters do sing about some of their regrets, but then they also sing about the little joys that they experience in between these little musical sequences here. And there's also a few more people in the bunker. There's a friend played by Brana Gallagher. There's a butler played by Tim McNierney, and a doctor played by Lenny James. And those other characters, they're a little bit more interesting because they do have more regrets that linger with them, and they do start more fights than they do end. But the family just constantly keeps trying to maintain this order. Not too aggressively. Like at first, like, yeah, they are aggressive with Moses Ingram. Like they don't want her here. They don't, and it's not so much that they can feed them as much as they don't trust her, or they don't think that she could, live with them in their current environment. But the thing is, she does, and I think the reason that she's kind of a little bit more accepting of them, and that they become a little bit more accepting of her, is realizing. And I might be off here, but I think it's the realization of the nihilism that there is nothing left in this world, and that when there is nothing left, all you really have is each other. And that very much becomes like the motif of the film, because a lot of the songs are just people singing about what they've lost and what they currently have, which is just, friends and family, and just, people to... people who love them to always be there for them, which eventually, it does lead to Moses Ingram and George McKay, forming a romantic relationship, and it kind of it proceeds very organically. It doesn't feel like it's forced upon them, or that their parents are kind of like hinting at them having children so that they can continue the human race. There's nothing like that, because all that really matters, I think, within this film is just the human connection. And the thing is, like, it's sweet on that level, but once you kind of like realize the thesis, the film just kind of feels like it's spinning its wheels with what it's trying to stage here. Because like, it looks nice, the cast is great here, and they sing pretty damn well, but they're mostly just, it feels like they're just singing the same songs over and over, and not just, I mean, they have different lyrics and much different melodies, but it just feels like they're repeating the point here about how they've lost everything, that they've been responsible for the degradation of the environment, and that all they can do now is just be together with each other and embrace that level of humanity within them. And I think, and I might be off here, but I think that Joshua Oppenheimer might have staged this film in a way to kind of, to kind of like, as almost kind of like a catharsis for the way that the world is going, and trying to find something more to live for, while also still recognizing the pains that linger beneath this family. Like the family clearly has guilt, but you do have to peer through it. Like, even with like the musical numbers that are a little bit more blunt with their feelings, you do kind of have to peer to see some of that guilt that lingers within them. Especially for like a few of the moments with there is like a little bit of like dry comedy here and there, but it's mostly playing up like the drama of the situation. Like if the comedy is like a bit more low key here. And the most frustrating thing for me with this film is I just think that it feels like it just keeps repeating itself as it goes along, that I don't feel like it's saying much more than just presenting these musical numbers, as if it's just trying to say, look, we're going to use the musical to get you to care about the environment and to care about the end of the world in a way that's not trying to feel too preachy. Which I think is very ambitious for Oppenheimer to try this. And I can't help but feel like there might be some level of just trying to seek any comfort from, all the horrors that come with humanity that might be evoked in this film. But, considering that this guy made two of the best documentaries that I've ever seen, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, this is a bit of a downgrade. Like, it feels very much like, it's not quite as bad, but it felt very much like when Michael Moore went from doing documentaries like Roger and Me to making his own narrative comedy with Canadian Bacon, where it feels like it's trying to save something, but it's just kind of spinning its wheels, and it's just repeating the thesis kind of over and over as it goes. It's like, yes, I can see what you're trying to evoke here, and I get it, and even layered under all the subtext here, I get it, but like, could there be something more? I mean, like, the film runs 2.5 hours, and it just feels like the same song, and not exploring anything more with this material, outside of just, how we just need to connect as people, even if like the end is near. So yeah, I was very mixed on this film. I love the performances, and the music is good, but I just feel for this type of thesis, I feel like Oppenheimer can do better. I feel like he can explore a lot more with this material, rather than just having like a bunch of lavish songs. As great as they look, and as great as the cast is, there's a bit of wasted potential here that I wasn't digging on it as much as I'd love to. So yeah, The End should be expanding. I think it's in limited release in a few places if you look around. And I think it's expanding in January. I don't know for certain if it's expanding in January. But you can keep a lookout for it if you want to see it. If you want to hear Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon sing, which they do sing pretty well, then it's worth watching for. Oh, by the way, I didn't say any of the names of the characters in The End, because they don't have any. The same goes. Also, the same goes for Night Bitch. In the Night Bitch, the characters don't have names. just like the mother, and then like within The End, it's just mother and father and son and all that. So it's not really that important, Some people are like, well, you have to have a name. It's like, not really. You could just call him Tilda Swinton if you want. I can just imagine it's really Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon. Okay, last film here. Let's see if I can knock this one out. All right, a little bit more water though. Because I can feel my throat going. All right. Okay, here we go with Oh Canada. And it's not a musical, it's not a comedy. So no singing the Canadian anthem. All right, here we go with Oh Canada in 3, 2, 1. So Oh Canada is the latest film from Paul Schrader. And this is a bit of a break from Schrader's usual films. Like his past few films have kind of all fallen into this category of violent men haunted by their past who write in their diary alone. And thankfully, Oh Canada is not that. This is a bit of a break from the usual here, and a very meaningful film, I think, because I think this film, it's more experimental, and I think it's a bit more biting than the past few Schrader films. Like the past few Schrader films have felt just like a little bit too quiet, and they felt like they were kind of like, by the time I got to like the one about the gardener, like it just felt like it was it was growing like a little bit more too much routine. So I was very much looking forward to Schrader kind of breaking from his convention here. So the film centers around Richard Gere playing Leonard Fife, who was a filmmaker and a draft dodger who departed to Canada to save himself from the draft. And he, in his old age, he's interviewed in his home and tries to tell his story about the love he lost and how he got into filmmaking, and just trying to like bare more of his soul to like these filmmakers that have come into his house. And Leonard is very much a curmudgeon. He wants to film this, he invited the director here, but he's just got all these nasty thoughts in his head, and he can feel like he's losing his mind and track of time, that he's just bitter about the world. So like we get to hear him talk like very openly and bluntly towards like the director, and like it's like, oh, you think about filmmaking? He doesn't prattle on with stories, but he just kind of like bites back where he can. But then we also get like his inner monologue where he's talking like he's looking at like one of the assistants of the director, and it's like, oh, this director is screwing her, isn't he? He's totally doing that. I know he is. And then also having thoughts about just very weird thoughts that you would kind of expect an old man to have in his head. Like at one point, he thinks about like, man, does the assistant does she smell me? Does she know how gross I am? Does she know about all the disgusting things that lie under my clothes, my body, and the fact that I've lost all function? And just lingering on all these like dark thoughts while also kind of like almost trying to like protect himself from the ghosts of his past, because he wants to talk about his past with this director, but he can't quite find the right words. And even though he has his wife, Emma, played by Uma Thurman, just off to the side, present kind of like more of his, kind of like someone to like ground him more. Emma's not really happy about this. She's basically watching her husband wither before her, and is just really bitter about him being open about his relationships and his affairs, and just like the way that he tells stories, because like he does reveal his past, in which like the younger version of himself, played by Jacob Elordi, is a very conflicted person, or so we think, because like the film darts between black and white footage and like the 166 aspect ratio and the 4:3 aspect ratio, and it just shifts all around because it perfectly illustrates how Leonard can't quite recall the past. Like there are moments where we see him recalling something, but then like the Richard Gere version of him will come into the frame. It's like, wait, did that really happen? Or is this him imagining himself there? Or is this part true? And even like he starts losing his own perceptions of reality as the interview goes on. Like at one point, he finds that there's nobody in the room, and then gets alone with his thoughts for a moment, gets lost in his head, and then looks up again, and then people are back. And it's just him losing track of his mind. And you really get the sensation that this is like someone struggling to write their memoir when their brain is going, when they can't recall everything about the past, or they'd rather keep stuff at bay, and there are people who would rather not reveal it. And just Leonard gets frustrated the more that it goes on. He gets frustrated with everybody around him. He gets frustrated with the director. He gets frustrated with his wife. He gets frustrated with himself, and just starts hating himself the more that this goes on, but realizes that he wants to bare his soul and just can't find the right words or the right memories to evoke it. And there's a lot of like relatable and tragic moments here, like especially when you see him dodging the draft, and when you see him making his films and presenting documentaries, and just struggling to find himself, and just like this recount of his life is portrayed in such a surreal and engrossing way that it really does feel like, some old guy trying to tell you about his life while losing track of it as he's telling it to you. So yeah, it's very much an unreliable narrator situation, but for as much as it lingers and meanders here and there, I feel like there is something deeper that gets evoked here, as opposed to just like the straight narrative of how, he was trying to form a relationship, he wanted to have a child, and it didn't quite work out, how he left America, how he pursued his ambitions, and just all this stuff that coated his life with passions and regret, and just all of it kind of like spilling out in this mess of memories that he's just trying to like sort through like a puzzle with pieces missing, and they don't all quite fit, and just growing frustrated and sad that you can't quite piece together your entire life and display it in a film. So there's something very bitterly sad about this existence of Leonard, and I think Schrader makes you care for this character even when he's just being angry and spiteful and just wants everybody around him to go away. You pity this guy, but you also like, you realize where he's coming from, and that this is a fairly believable old guy who's just growing so, like almost like nihilistic with like the entire world around him, that even though he wants to film it, he still wants to shut everything out. So it's very much a conflict for this very complicated character, and Paul Schrader's film just does an amazing job getting lost within the story, and the psychological messiness that comes with growing older and having regrets, and maybe not finding all the right words or descriptions or memories or even just visuals to portray that loss that you feel when you grow older, and that you feel that your life is coming to an end. So yeah, this is much like Paul Schrader's other films. There is some existential dread in this film, but on a much deeper and older and sagely level it's just such an intoxicating film. So yeah, for being a big divergence from Schrader's last films, I absolutely loved Oh Canada. So, Oh Canada. It's in limited release right now, but it should be expanding next month. Search around for it if you can. Actually, I probably should have written that down in my notes too. Let me do a quick check about when it's coming out here. Okay. So it did have a limited release here. It was released on December 6th. Yeah. Yeah, it's December 6th through Kino Lorber. So, yeah, so I think it might be in some theaters. You might have to look around for it, but if it's not, it should be coming out on home video through Kino Lorber. So watch it through there if you can't. But I would highly recommend it, especially if you love Paul Schrader films. You'll probably love this one, especially if you didn't like his past few films of like the Master Gardener and the Card Counter and films like those. If you found those films very repetitive and not Schrader at his best, definitely check out Oh Canada. This is the director flexing more of his muscles without like the same type of character. So, all right, so let's have a quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's stream. We reviewed Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, a fantastic historical horror film. Eggers does them best, like no other director. Fantastic retelling of the German Expressionist film, except it finds a lot more darkness and sexuality to explore, which, again, you expect from Eggers, but it still surprises me. It's still a great horror film. I reviewed Queer from Luca Guadagnino, based on the William S. Burroughs novel. It has a fantastic performance by Daniel Craig, playing an aged writer in 1950s Mexico, seeking any sensation he can through sex, drugs, and booze, and is bitter when he can't quite find the perfect aspects, can't quite find the perfect vices to get away from the past. It's a great Guadagnino film and a fantastic performance by Daniel Craig. Review of The Night Bitch, in which Amy Adams transforms into a dog to deal with the pangs of motherhood. Has a few good scenes here and there and some great performances, but the film doesn't quite balance its creature feature angle with its thematic elements about motherhood as well as it should. I reviewed September 5th, the film about the 1972 Olympic terrorist attack attack, seen entirely from the point of view of the ABC News crew. It's a fantastic film if you love broadcast journalism, and a pretty good recount of one of the most intense events for being the first live filmed terrorist attack on television. I reviewed The End, a musical about the apocalypse from Joshua Oppenheimer, from the director of The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence. It's not as good as his documentaries, despite having some pretty good songs here and there, and a fantastic cast that includes Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon. They're great in the film, but it feels like it keeps repeating itself the more that it goes along. And finally, I reviewed Ode Canada, the latest film from Paul Schrader about an Asian filmmaker trying to recount his life, but being unable to piece together his memories. It's very surreal, very psychological, and it's definitely one of the better films that Schrader has made in recent years. So, of those films that I reviewed on here, I think the top one is obviously Nosferatu. That one is definitely worth seeking out. Probably going to be the easiest one to seek out. But if you can't wait till Christmas and you got to see something this weekend, I would highly recommend going to see Queer. It's fantastical. Great performance by Daniel Craig, and it's great to get lost within that film, especially the soundtrack by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Another banger from those guys. Another banger from Guadagnino, and the best that I've seen of Daniel Craig. So go see that this weekend. And then when Christmas rolls around, go see Nosferatu. But I doubt I have to tell you that. I'm pretty sure, if I know my audience here, if you like Robert Eggers films like The Northman, The Lighthouse, and The Witch, you know. You already have your tickets. Let's see, I'll read the comments here. Ever seen a French thriller called Deadly Games, a.k.a. Dial Code Santa Claus? Yes. I was trying to... Here's the thing. I do remember that film, but I forgot the right name for it. Because if I'm remembering it correctly, because I want to make sure, because I think it's gone by a different title before. Let me look it up here. Because I swear I have seen this film. Yes, Dial Code Santa Claus. That's what it was. Because I think I remembered as the other title. What was it called? It was it's is it 36? Is it like 36 Code Noel? I think that's it. Is it? Let me check here. Oh, here it is. Okay, so 36.15 Code Perry Noel, aka Deadly Games. Yes, that's it. Because I had seen the film, but it confused me because it had so many different titles. Like it had Perry, like 3615 Perry Noel, and then Deadly Games, and then Dial Code Santa Claus. But yeah, it's a great film. Like if you want like to see like a deadlier version of Home Alone, yeah, it's a great film. yeah. I just saw the chat. Yes, 3615 Perry Noel. Yep. Yeah, it had a lot of titles. Whatever you call it, it's a great film if you want like a somewhat grittier version of Home Alone. Yeah, it's a good film, but I haven't seen it like 15 years, so I do remember being really good. Because I remember I got it from a weird video store that had all these like weird bootlegs and stuff like that, and. And like they had a copy of it, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" And yeah, we watched it, and it blew my mind. So yeah, very underrated Christmas film. I would recommend it if you can find it. Is it available? Oh wait, is it on Shudder? Is it? It is. It is on Shudder. Oh my God, yes. Okay, so if you have not seen this film, it is on Shudder. So. If you're looking for a Divergent Christmas movie this season, go check that out. Okay, so if you'd like to see written reviews of the movies I reviewed on today's program, you can go to movieswithmark.com. And if you'd like to stay informed on the latest movies, because I'm pretty sure, aside from Queer, I don't think any of these films have expanded that far out there. So you're getting some early stuff here. You're not even getting everything. I've been watching like 3 to 4 movies a day for the past 2 weeks, because I'm overloaded with the for your consideration screeners right now. Like just today, I watched an Indian drama called All the Light We Imagine, or was it like, it was like All We Imagine Is Light, something like that. And then I watched Baby Girl, the latest romantic drama with Nicole Kidman. And there's tons. I'll probably review those next week, because like we got more to talk about next week. Because what's coming up next week? Well, we're going to be reviewing Mufasa. We'll be reviewing Sonic 3, the big holiday movies that are coming out. Aside from Nosferatu and all that, obviously. And who knows what else we'll cover. I think depending on what other screeners I have left, I'll probably cover some of the films that I haven't talked about. There are a few great films that I haven't quite talked about on stream that I love to talk about, like Sing Sing, which is definitely one of my favorite films of the year that I just saw recently, and just a whole bunch of other films that I got to talk about. The Netflix film Maria. What else? There were more A24 films. I did talk about Baby Girl. There's a new Cillian Murphy movie called Small Things Like These, which is so damn good. The Brutalist. I have also seen that, starring Adrian Brody. Another fantastic. There's so many good films that I can't wait to talk about, and I will try to. Craven is worse than Madam Web. Well, I didn't have high hopes for Madam Web, so maybe Craven is worse. I did miss the screening for that, but I figured I wasn't missing much, especially since I got so much else to cover. Maybe I will cover Craven. I'll see if I can find a way to cover it next week. If it really is that bad, I might cover it, just because Madam Web was so damn bad. It was so wooden, and the product placement, it was just some of the most egregious I've seen. So yeah. But yeah, we'll cover all that. We'll cover the big holiday movies next week, as well as a few smaller films that'll be opening next week. So if you want to stay informed of the latest movies, be sure to like this video so that more people know about films coming out like Nosferatu and why it's good, and be sure to subscribe so that you're informed about the latest movies as well, because there's tons to cover here. Because yeah, we're getting close to the end of the year, and I'm trying to like finish everything. See every movie I can so that I can finish my top 10 list. I think I just about have it done. I've got about like 25 films left to watch, which sounds daunting. Like there's not even 25 days left in the year. But I am going to try to cover it so that I can finish my top 10 list and get that done, because I have a few other publications I got to get that ready for. But yeah, I will get to covering that. So yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to head over to the Patreon as well, where I am writing passages on the history of Saturday morning cartoons. We're currently up to Dragon Ball Z on there, so we're into the 90s era. So if you want to catch up on that and get a copy of my book on Saturday morning cartoons when it's finished, you can support the Patreon there as well. But other than that, we'll be back next week covering more of the big holiday films. So until next time, have a good one, everybody. Really quick. I forgot one last thing I was gonna do. So yeah, I have not. I've enabled Super Chat, but I never got one before. So special thanks to Corrance. For the $5 for Super Chat. I will put that on my Netflix watch list, so thank you very much for that. So just had to get that out of the way. Okay, this thumb kiss is for real. Later.